Hey everybody, I'm Jill Redfern and welcome to Third Shift Movement Shop, home of Literal Technique. This is a tutorial about alignment of the pelvic barrel. But before we get into that, I want to back us up a couple of steps and just talk about the 33 vertebrae to set us up for that conversation. So, Literal Technique says that the spinal column is one structure with 33 vertebrae that move jointly but differently. That means they move together, they work together, but they don't all do the same thing. The 33 vertebrae are divided anatomically as the cervical vertebrae, which curve into the body, the thoracic vertebrae, which curve out away from the body, the lumbar vertebrae, which curve back in, and then the sacrum and the tailbone, which curve away from the body. So the 33 vertebrae are one structure that move jointly but differently. The pelvic barrel is one of the bones that derives its alignment directly from the 33 vertebrae. So pelvic barrel is down here. The pelvic barrel is a 360-degree thing. It doesn't have independent parts that can move separately from one another. It's a 360-degree thing. So when the vertebrae move, the pelvic barrel moves. And that happens in two places. When the sacral vertebrae move, the pelvic barrel moves. And when the lumbar vertebrae move, the pelvic barrel moves. So we've got our work cut out for us in alignment of the pelvic barrel. This is a complicated area, and I'm not going to mention half of the ligaments or muscles that help us stabilize this area. Right now, I just want to have us get familiar with the bones that make up the pelvic barrel and the vertebrae that are moving it. So let's start first with the bones that make it up. The pelvic barrel is made up of the two hip bones, the sacral vertebrae, and the tailbone. The sacral vertebrae and the tailbone are each fused things. There are 5 sacral vertebrae that are fused together. There are 4 tailbone vertebrae that are fused together, and so when the sacrum moves, the tailbone just does whatever the sacrum does. It doesn't have any independent movement of its own, and their vertebrae are fused, so they don't have any independent movement of their own. The sacrum and the tailbone are connected to the last lumbar vertebrae at an approximately 140-degree angle, and maybe you can see this. It's an angle that, if it were 180 degrees, it would be straight out from behind us, but it's 140 and it's curving in, so it's got it's at an angle and at a curve. So the sacrum and the tailbone don't rotate. There's no independent vertebrae that can rotate. What they do is they flex and extend. The lumbar vertebrae flex, extend, and they flex laterally as well, minimally, and they have very minimal rotation. The lumbar vertebrae curve into the body as a natural flexion at about 40 to 60 degrees, depending on the person and their anatomy. And then we have the ability to flex, extend, and laterally rotate the lumbar vertebrae. Most of the vertebrae that flex the most are the lumbar vertebrae, and they can flex at an additional 40 to 60 degrees. And in this instance, flexion means this. They can extend at about 35 degrees. The best example of extension of the lumbar vertebrae is when you take your leg to the back. The lumbar vertebrae have to extend to allow for the shift of the pelvis. And then lateral flexion, they can do a little bit of this, but not a lot, and they don't rotate a lot at all. So these two, the lumbar vertebrae and the sacral vertebrae, meet at what is called the lumbosacral joint. L5, so the lumbar vertebrae start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the sacrum, so this is L5 and that's S1. The meeting of those two vertebrae is the lumbosacral joint. The lumbosacral joint is where most of the movement of the lumbar vertebrae happens. Most of the movement allowed by this joint is flexion and extension. So down in this part of the body, and we know this from, our technical training, most of what happens in this section of the body is stability. The sacrum and the hip bones, the pelvic barrel, is set up to be stable. It doesn't have a huge amount of movement. I think the sacral vertebrae will flex or extend maybe 3 degrees at this joint, at the lumbosacral joint. But for the most part, what movement is taking place in extension is happening in the lumbar vertebrae. When they extend or flex, they're moving the pelvic barrel because of the lumbosacral joint. When they flex and extend, the sacrum and the tailbone do the opposite. When the lumbar vertebrae flex, the sacrum and the tailbone extend. When the lumbar vertebrae extend, the sacrum and the tailbone flex. So we can sort that out later, but what I want you to take away from that is that this is what we've got. If this is the lumbar and this is the sacrum, and that the lumbar are extending, the sacrum is doing that, which means the pelvis is doing that. If the lumbar are flexing in, the pelvis is doing this because the sacrum is extending. So we have a thing like this going on down there, and that's significant for a couple of reasons related to alignment and technique. To know that the movement that's happening, that's moving the pelvis, the pelvic barrel, is happening at this joint. The vertebrae are involved, but the reason the vertebrae are flexing and extending is the joint is allowing that to happen. So when we think about alignment in an upright position, well, I always want to start there so we can grasp this concept, is the lumbosacral joint is neutral when we have no flexion and no extension. The pelvic barrel is neutral when we have no flexion and no extension at this joint and of these vertebrae. So when you are looking for alignment of the pelvic barrel, you're not going to look for alignment by looking at the sits bones or the pubic bone or any other part of the pelvic barrel, because the pelvic barrel moves because the vertebrae move. It's really that simple. So this week in your class, when you are doing, I want to say some really simple tendu to the front and the side, put your hand back on this joint, put your fingers back there, and put it here, whatever you have to do. Put your hand on the bar. If you're standing in the center in modern, you can put your hand here. But if you're doing simple tendus, to the front and the side, you should be able to feel whether you're flexed or extended in that joint. So that's a good way to test it, just to see if you're flexed or extended. If you are, your pelvic barrel isn't neutral. And that's important. We need to know where neutral is. The entire activity of dancing is taking the bones in and out of neutral. But we need to know where we're going back to and where we start from. So, see what you can find out about your own lumbosacral joints neutrality this week, and I will see you next week.